Well, hello and welcome to today's episode of the Power of Your Mind podcast. You're listening to episode number 166. I'm Victoria Gallagher, Law of Attraction hypnotist and number one best-selling author of Practical Law of Attraction. Align yourself with the manifesting conditions and successfully attract your desires. I'm also the founder of HipTalk.com and HypnoCloud apps, which gives you access to over 500 hypnosis recordings right in the palm of your hand. So be sure to download that app from the app stores today. And today I have a very special guest with me, Amy Smith. Amy Smith is a certified and credentialed life coach and hypnotherapist, masterful speaker, and personal empowerment expert. She's the founder of thejoyjunkie.com. And Amy uses her roles as a coach, writer, podcaster, and speaker to move people to a place of radical personal empowerment and self worth. And she can be found at thejoyjunkie.com website and also thejoyjunkie.com/pods podcast. And today, Amy is going to be sharing some of her insights on leveraging hypnotherapy to rewire the subconscious mind. And so, welcome to the show, Amy.
Yay, I'm so glad to be here. I forgot that what bio you had, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh." It's always a little bit like, "Oh," listening to somebody read your bio. Oh, but that's
I can
awesome.
relate to that too, because I've got one in my book, I've got one on old websites, I've got one, and it's like, whoa, I need to have have all of these places updated. So
Mhm.
yeah, I know what that's like. I hope I got the right one.
Yes. Yes, yes, you're just fine.
Good, good. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's just been fun having a little pre-show chit chat. That's one of the things we get to do when we bring guests on, is we have our little pre-show chit chat. And so we've been chatting about, the things that we're going to be sharing with you today and talking to you about. And if you're not watching this on YouTube, you guys need to actually watch this on YouTube, because you just have to see what a beautiful person that I'm speaking
Oh,
to, and these beautiful glasses and this beautiful chair, this beautiful background. And I just
oh,
just love everything about it. So be sure, if you're listening, to go check out the YouTube channel. And if you're watching it here on YouTube, be sure to download the podcast as well. So
yes.
thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm super excited to chat with you. And I love all of the concepts around hypnotherapy and how we work with the subconscious faculty of the mind. So I'm sure we can nerd out on this for a while.
We definitely can. We definitely can. So let's just, kind of get into where you got started with this. I understand that you have a very, very specific moment in your life when you learned about just because the topic of this show is going to be about setting boundaries and
Right.
all of that. So what was it that moment where you really realize that you've just got to let go of other people's opinions and step into using your voice?
Yeah. It was a very specific moment. It was in '07. And to give you a little bit of some context, I grew up in an extremely conservative, born again Christian family, very, very rich with dogma, lots of motivation from guilt and fear. And just for a bit of juxtaposition, my two younger siblings had had a lot of issues with the law and had done some jail time and very tumultuous youth. And then compared to me, I was working since I was 14 and put myself through college, got married really early and moved out of the house. And so very independent on all of those accounts. So keep that in your mind there for a second. So flash forward to '07, my father passed away. And I had a background in makeup artistry. So I knew that I felt very convicted very strongly that I was going to do his makeup for the viewing. So, and I also knew that I wanted to speak at his service. And so, needless to say, I very much felt like I was winning at daughter that day, speaking to this crowd of hundreds, doing makeup on my dead father's corpse. We get back home to my mom's house, and she found it the most opportune time to tell me that she feels as though my father and her had failed as parents because the three of us were not, quote, walking with the Lord. So because I was not on the same religious path that she was on, it didn't matter who I was. It didn't matter my character. It didn't matter what I did in the world. All that mattered was that I subscribed to that same very rigid dogma. And the only thing I could kind of manage in that moment was to say, you probably shouldn't say that to a child. And she just,
Right.
I'm thinking, okay, there's a teaching moment here. And she said, well, that's just how I feel. And I realized in that moment that I could keep putting up this facade, because up until that time, when my husband and I would go visit my family, it was, you know, don't cuss, no drinking, don't talk about any liberal agenda, don't talk about Howard Stern or Jon Stewart or like what, the shit that we would watch all the time. And I was kind of, let's keep up this veneer. And I didn't necessarily lie, but I didn't let them know that I had very much broken free from a lot of the things I was raised with. So at that moment, I kind of realized, okay, I can either keep this facade up, keep up this mask, this veneer, and choose to make her happy, choose to make her fulfilled at a severe cost to myself, or I can choose me. And there's going to be pain that's incurred by that because not everybody's going to like that. And I also don't think that each and every time that we speak up for ourselves, it becomes that ultimatum of, I either choose you or I choose me. But I'll tell you what, I decided that if it did come down to that, I was going to choose me. And that
Yeah.
truly was kind of the impetus to the work that I do now in the world.
Good for you. Good for you. And having that realization and having the wherewithal to realize that, this is something that you do have to choose you. And yeah, it doesn't always necessarily have to come down to that ultimatum. Not every boundary is going to mean it's a total ultimatum like you had in that moment. But this was very important because it's it really kind of comes down to your identity and who you are. And are you going to like lose yourself and get caught up in somebody else's agenda for you, or pretend? And you're right, it is very detrimental to our well-being, walking in somebody else's footsteps that they
Right.
think is appropriate for us. It's not to say, religion is bad or good. I mean, if you subscribe, whatever you subscribe to is fine. It's just everybody has the free will to make their own choices.
That's right. That's right. And I'll tell you what, that it was quite an interesting trajectory right after that, because it was kind of like the floodgates had opened. And so then I wanted I became very combative and adversarial, and I wanted to discuss all of the things that we were in direct opposition to. And it wasn't until many, many situations where I had to apologize for my delivery, where I was not proud of the woman that I showed up as,
Mm.
that it kind of dawned on me and hit me that, oh, you can speak up for yourself. You can be assertive. You can deliver boundaries, and you can do that with the utmost grace and kindness. You can ask your adult children to move out of the house. You can ask for a divorce. You can tell a stranger to not try to touch your pregnant belly. You can have all of these, things that we're not taught how to have those conversations. You can do all of those things. and not be an asshole about it, but still be very assertive. And that was one of the biggest things that I learned, largely with the conversations that I had with my mom following that incident. And this is where I think people get tripped up sometimes, is we're so uncomfortable with being uncomfortable that we take back our boundary. So I would have these conversations with her where I was really vitriolic and biting and was not proud of who I was. However, I still felt very strongly about the content, about what I was actually advocating for. So then my apology would look like, hey, listen, you really did not deserve to be spoken to like that. I still feel very strongly about what I was sharing with you, but I didn't deliver it in a kind way. And for that, I'm sorry. Because I think sometimes we take it all back the minute we get opposition from someone else. We go,
Right.
oh gosh, sorry, I didn't
Oh, I
mean it. I
didn't mean
didn't mean it.
that. Yeah. No,
Exactly.
that makes a lot of sense. So, like, besides, religion, like, what are some other things that people do, to, cross our boundaries without even realizing it? Because I think that's such a misunderstood topic. I just hear it from a lot of people where, people bring up the word boundary, but I hear it misused a lot. And,
Yes.
and so I really would love you as the expert to speak to our audience a little bit about really even what a boundary actually means and what are some ways that, that people might be breaking our boundaries and
Yes.
yeah, just if you could kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. Well, I think the way that I describe it, and we can have different types of boundaries, like physical boundaries or emotional boundaries. There are all sorts of different categories that we could put them in. But truly, the way I perceive it is something that you are no longer going to tolerate, or that you are going to request change, or you will not tolerate it any longer. So, for example, if there's somebody in your workplace, let's say, who continues to make specific comments or wants to direct a conversation in a specific way, and you've said multiple times that that's offensive to you or that you're not interested in having that conversation, it's about, I'm not tolerating that anymore and shutting that shit down. And we can talk about some different ways to do that. But I think possibly the best place for people to start identifying where do those boundaries need to be established is simply by the things that we complain about constantly and consistently. Because this
Mhm.
is what I see, Victoria, and I'm not sure if you see this too, where if you're really frustrated with your business partner, let's say,
Mhm. Mhm.
your your marital partner gets the earful. Or if
Mhm.
you're super
Uh,
you're super frustrated with your mom, but it's your best friend that gets the earful. So
Mhm.
perhaps you are speaking up, but you're speaking up to the wrong party. And
Mhm.
and it's very different than just venting and expelling frustrated emotion. I think that's a very, very healthy thing to do. But what I'm talking about is chronic complaining about someone or something where you are not taking any type of action to remedy the situation.
Right.
That is usually the place where a boundary is being called for. So you can
Mhm.
take a little inventory in your own life of, maybe it's even with your business mastermind, like getting together with your mastermind and you're complaining about the same client over and over and over again, but you haven't set up a boundary with that client,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? About maybe they want to email you on the weekends or send you messages on the after hours, and it's a breach of boundary. If you tolerate that, if you accept the call, if you return the email, you are basically saying, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean that boundary. So we've I'm sure you've heard the phrase of, we teach people how to treat us,
Yep.
and we do that largely through what we choose to tolerate. And so that's kind of how I size up boundaries and kind of give people an entry point to find out where might I need to establish them. And then we can certainly talk about what it actually sounds like to deliver them too.
Yeah, that's a really I had a personal experience, in this last year where a person that I was close to, I'll just say, we, and your camera just froze. Okay, you're better. Where this person I'm, close to, or was close to, we're no longer close. And it's because I set a boundary, and maybe I didn't do it the right way, but we just don't see eye to eye on political matters. And I don't want to talk about it. I absolutely I think there's so many other things that, we could talk about. But they would say to me, that because I don't want to engage with the political matters that we don't see eye to eye on, it means I don't care about it, and or I don't care about what's important to that person. And I said, no, we just don't see eye to eye on it. And when it comes up, we're not able to agree to disagree. And so because of that, I want to put my foot down and just say, this is just not an area that we need to be engaging in. And
Right.
so let's talk about other things. But they would continue to bring it up, bring it up, bring it up, bring it up. And it's but in a nasty way, you know what I mean? It's just like lopping me in with a group of people that, and I don't see things as black or white, when it comes to these things. I don't see it's like if you voted for this person, that you stand for everything, that person
Mhm.
stands for. I don't believe things like that. It's not a black or white thing. There's a lot of gray areas. And so all that to say, I'm just like, look, it's like there's so many other things that we could have a relationship on, that we could talk about. And but I've just finally said, listen, until you're willing to stop bringing this up, we I don't talk to me,
Yeah,
basically. Just
that's
you're not
right.
allowed to talk to me, because I've put my foot down multiple times. And since I said that, haven't heard from them. So it's really sad. But I'm curious if there was any thing that you recommend. So that's a that's a real actual event.
Yes.
I didn't think I was going to talk about that, but you somehow magically pulled that out of me. But I think it's
Yes.
good to actually have a real situation that we can actually discuss. How does a person handle that? To
Yes.
me, that's a very big boundary issue. And I think a lot of people, come up with that because there's so many things that, this it's like just agreeing to disagree on things, because hurtful things are going to be said
Right.
during those moments. And so we have to have those boundaries as a way to protect ourselves from hearing hurtful things coming at you.
Right.
And so anyway, back to you.
Well, I certainly don't think there's nothing glaring that I'm like, "Ooh, you should have done this," or nothing like that at all. So, but I think that there's some really specific points here that we can talk about. The first is I am super happy to engage in conversations with people where respect is the baseline. And it sounds like you're similar in that way, and that respect was not the baseline from the very, very beginning. There was a lot of you are this, well, you're that, name calling, grouping you in with people. And what we know about relationships, and you might be super versed on the work of John Gottman, but talks all the time about how we will not make change ever in a relationship unless we feel understood.
Mm.
And in the political
Oh,
realm,
yes.
we all feel very misunderstood, right? So we are victim of a very hyperbolic media that only amplifies the extremes of both sides. So we get a very distinct narrative all the way around, no matter what. And
Mhm.
I personally think that a majority of us are far more aligned than we realize simply because we're pitted against one another. It's my own personal opinion. But in this situation, what is so blaringly obvious to me is that this other individual was not willing to hear you, wanted you to hear them very clearly, wanted to be heard for everything that they're expressing, but was not permitting you to be heard as well. It was not a reciprocal conversation. So the way in which I typically attack a boundary or a situation that calls for one is to first decide on the boundary. Now, the key piece with that is specificity, is being very, very clear. So let's say you're desiring something from a intimate partnership, and you want more romance, and you say, I just want more romance. And they're like, well, what the fuck does that mean? Like, I don't, do they want me to initiate sex more? Do they want me to leave little notes around the house? Do they want me to do the more household things? So we have to be incredibly specific and clear. So you had that spot on to decide on the boundary of, I'm not going to engage in this particular topic of conversation any longer. And if you do, I'm going to politely remove myself from the conversation. That's the first part. The second part is the actual delivering of the boundary. Now, this piece has a bevy of different nuances depending on the relationship with the person. Now, if it was somebody who I genuinely really loved, and I really did enjoy having them in my life, and I would want to continue to have great, rich conversations about other topics, then I would enter in with gratitude and vulnerability. And it would sound something like this. So, hey, I wanted to just run some stuff by you, some things that I've been kind of thinking about lately. And I've realized that I have been building up some animosity and some resentment, and I haven't been clear with you about that. There's no way you would even know that this was bothering me. And that's wildly unfair to you. So I would love, if you're up for it, I would love to just share with you some of the things that have been happening in my mind, right? So you're saying you're taking responsibility for your interpretation, and just get your thoughts on it, because I really do love you and value you, and I don't want to be secretly making up stories about you. And then I would say, here's my perception. My perception is that when this topic comes up, it gets extremely heated, and I feel like there's oftentimes assumptions that are made, and boxes that were lumped into. And if I'm being really candid, I leave those conversations incredibly drained and just saddened. I don't feel heard. I don't feel excited. I don't feel enlightened or invigorated. And and I think there's more for our friendship than leaving situations like that. What are your thoughts? And entering into a dialogue around it. Um,
Okay, so I'm going to this is being recorded. And so I'm going to play this back and I'm going to have somebody transcribe this as a script. And whenever this situation comes up in the future, I'm going to read that word for word. That was, and I'm watching you. You're not reading anything. I mean, just that it's so eloquently stated. That's beautiful. I love that.
well, excuse me, like I was mentioning before. Oh, I totally choked on my coffee. Excuse me.
Oh, sorry. I know how
I
that feels.
I I had to make so many messes, Victoria. So many messes before. Now it sounds like I'm crying about it.
You guys, she's really not crying. She just
I,
choked on her coffee.
I just choked on my coffee. I was trying to be all stealthy and put myself on mute. But yeah, so that took me a lot of trial and error. And so there's a couple of key distinctions. One is if you can request the time to talk with that person and just say, hey, there's some stuff that's been on my mind. I'd really love to get your thoughts on it. Not to say we need to talk and coming
Mhm.
across abrasively, that will immediately elicit defense from the other person.
Yes.
So if you are, a lot of times in psychology, they call it the soft startup, right? You softly enter in, you ask for the time to talk, but then gratitude of, hey, thanks for making some space with me. I really appreciate it. And then owning your shit, owning the fact that you've been having some stuff go on and that you haven't been vocal about it. You can't control what they do or don't do. But as
Mhm.
far as your side of the road staying clean, you haven't given them even the opportunity to be what you need. That's on
Mhm.
you to at least say, hey, Here are the things that are happening for me. What are your thoughts? Right? So that's an example. If it was more of a collaborative, I want to work on this relationship, I want to move through this. Now there's a litany of time, and to say, hey, I wanted to reiterate some of my policies with you. My office hours are from this to this, right? Very specific. And so if you catch me after these hours, please know that I won't get back to you until Monday. And,
Mm-hmm.
setting that, it's not necessarily, what are your thoughts? How can we work on this? Right. So we've got decide on the boundary, deliver the boundary. And then the third one, which I think is possibly the most challenging part that we don't bargain for, that sounds like you did brilliantly, is the enforcement.
Yes.
Because a lot of
Because
times
it's
we
all
get,
talk unless unless you actually pull the trigger.
that's right. Well, because we also, for a lot of people, if you tend towards people pleasing or you are highly invested in what other people think, just being vocal to begin with feels like this monumental task where you went, whew, got that done with. Okay, good. But let me tell you what, if you have been someone who has not spoken up, a lot of times these people in your life prefer the people pleasing version of you. They like the version of you that acquiesces and, oh, Victoria will do it. Oh, Amy will do it. They never speak. They don't care. I'm sure if it was a problem, they would say something. We teaching people how to treat you through what you choose to tolerate. So the enforcement is really just circling back and saying, hey, I meant that, the minute it gets breached. So the minute the politics starts coming up again with the same sort of cadence, hey, I get that you're super, super passionate about this. And it's one of the things that I admire a lot about you. But I really need to underline again, it just breaks me to have these conversations. And
Mm.
I enjoy our time together so much. I don't have the emotional bandwidth or the real mental real estate to do this with you.
That's beautiful.
And
So, gosh,
yeah.
I would love to be able to tap into that vocabulary. Because honestly, a lot of times when these things happen, you're triggered, you're in an emotional state. And so, that's why it's good to set aside that time because,
That's right.
like, a lot of times I think people will try to set boundaries in the moment that the boundary triggering event is happening, and that's not a good time to try to set them.
That's right. That's right. So, a couple of ways to mitigate that. The first is at the initial boundary setting or the initial conversation, write it out. Like, write it out and then say to them, like, hey, I know this might seem really silly that I wrote this out, but I really wanted to get this right because you mean so much to me and I didn't want to say something I didn't mean. So, if you could bear with me, I'm just going to read you what I've got to say here, and then I would love to hear your side or your perception. The other thing that you can do is to forecast the breaching of the boundary. So if
Mhm.
you know you're going to be around that person, let's say at a group function, or you're going to see them at a networking meeting, and you have a feeling that they're going to bring up that same thing that you have requested not to, rehearse in advance. These are the couple of things that I have good evidence that they will likely bring up again. What do I want to say in response? And I think one of the key pieces here is to not get baited into the content, because a lot of times what will happen is we'll be asked a question like, so did you see so and so on Fox News, or did you see this and that, um or what do you think of that new legislation, or how about this? And so they're starting with the bait of the
Yes.
content. And so our
Yes.
instinct is, if I'm being asked a question, I have to answer the question. No, you do not have to. So in that moment, to say, hey, I get that you're passionate about this, but again, I just need to underline, this is kind of an off limits topic for me. So how's your son's basketball tournament going? Right? Like, immediately, like, out of here,
Yeah.
switching that topic.
In a moment, I'm gonna ask you about the hypnotherapy aspect of this,
Yeah.
because I have some ideas, but I bet you have some amazing ideas as well. But before we get into that, I wanted to just share a quick boundary setting story where I future paced a situation
Okay.
where I thought that this might come up, and it did, and it worked. And that was when my husband and I, before we got married or even engaged, we had about a 3-month split. And it was because of the fact that I wanted to get married and he did not. And so he told me one day, this isn't probably ever going to happen. So, as I was going through our breakup and my kind of healing, I had these visions of like, what if he comes back and tries to get back together? And what am I going to do? Because I got to be, clear with him that, like, well, only reason we can possibly get back together again is, that we're getting engaged. And so I just had this foresight to train myself to what to say, like just like literally go through the conversation that would ensue and all the different ways that it would
Yes.
happen. And I imagined like what I would say. And then I found myself in that very situation. And I'm like, here we go. And I was
Yes.
able to just pull that trigger and just say, okay, well, I I love everything that you said. I'm so glad that you're feeling that way. And you kind of know what you need to do next. And so I'll talk to you when you're ready, when you're really
Right.
ready. And pretty much within a week I had a ring on my finger. So it worked.
Well,
And it's
one of
not an ultimatum, like that wasn't an ultimatum. We'd already been down that road before.
right,
That was a
right.
boundary. That was like, we're very clear on the fact that we hit a point in our relationship. You said no, I said yes. And the only way we're getting back together is for us both to be on the same page about this.
I think an interesting distinction is the difference between an ultimatum and a boundary and the motivation, like the essence or the come from an ultimatum is I either win or you win. Like only one of us wins. And who's going to like tough it out and fight, And whereas a boundary is a different perspective, it's a different come from. So it's hey, you get to honor yourself and I get to honor myself. And here are the components that have to be present. I think about it like in terms of food, right? Like if we have a gluten allergy,
Yeah.
if that doesn't sit well with our system, it doesn't do us any good to talk a bunch of shit on gluten and always be like, ooh, is that gluten? Oh, gross. Ugh. All you do is just avoid it. You just stay away from it and you focus on, I don't know, lentils or something. You focus on something else. Right. So it's instead of consuming with why something doesn't work for you, to be more consumed with, okay, got that out of the picture, or that's not going to work for me. What are the things that do? And let me stay focused there. So it's a different come from. It's a I value me. And then how it's delivered, then I always think of I want sort of this partnership between grace and kindness, which are a major cornerstone, and then assertiveness that I'm going to be loving, I'm going to be kind, I'm going to be graceful, but I'm also going to be very assertive and emphasize what I will and will not tolerate. And you can do that with seemingly innocuous decisions and issues, and you can do that with monumental decisions like that you shared.
Yeah, yeah, it's beautiful. I love all of the ways that you distinguish these words, but I really do think that setting boundaries has so much of those distinctions built in,
Right.
right? So you're really good at distinguishing between all of the different terminologies that we're all dealing with. Why do you think it is so difficult for most people to really speak up for themselves?
Yeah, well, I think if we look back at just sort of the evolution of man and primitive man, if you did not belong to a group of individuals back in our hunter gatherer days, that literally meant impending death. So then we have things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that one of our primary basic human needs is the sense of belonging, which stems from that hunter-gatherer situation. So to just understand that we're already wired for connection, we're already wired for belonging, because on a primitive level, that unconscious brain is telling us, if Judy in accounting doesn't approve of me, or if my in-law thinks I'm an asshat, I might die. That's what's happening on that deep-rooted unconscious level. But we know consciously that, okay, that person's disapproval of me, or if that person doesn't like me or enjoy what I had to say, I'm not actually going to die,
Mm-hmm.
but I am going to incur some physical discomfort and some emotional discomfort. So I think that's one of the pieces of it, is we've never been taught how to be with somebody not being happy with us without rushing to fix it. And that's very disproportionate to women too, I will say. We have all these idioms like, don't rock the boat,
Mm.
don't open up a can of worms, sweep it under the rug. All of these ways to basically say, shut the
Let
fuck up and
sleeping
make it.
dogs lie.
Yes. Yes. Make everybody else happier than you. Like, make sure you take care of everyone else's emotions. And so I really think that constantly putting everybody else in front of yourself is poison disguised as nobility.
Mm.
We think that it is so noble to lay ourselves down and let everyone walk all over us. But what you're doing when you're doing that is you're being a liar. Just, you're not being authentic. It's the antithesis to living your authentic life. So to answer your question, I think, first of all, we're wired that way. Second of all, in our society, we're taught, again, disproportionately as women, that we're responsible for everybody else's emotions. And then we've also been taught that to get ahead, we have to be more masculine and more man-like, and we can't have soft power, that we have to be a bitch, right? And so we have to fit into this other mold, when we don't at all. And and that will also, I do think it's important to say, affect people based on their marginalized identity. So if you come from a community where you're a person of color, or you have a disability, or where you are part of the LGBTQ community, all of those various types of identities will also inform, oh, I have to make sure everybody else is okay with me, that they're not too uncomfortable around me. So we're taught to use it as a defense mechanism. So be compassionate with yourself, because we adopt that to stay safe. We
Yeah.
stay silent because we learned that it was a way that we could fly under the radar, until we get to this point where we go, that is arresting my future and my development and where I want to go. And we start realizing that we have to retrain that subconscious belief that people pleasing is the safe path, and which,
Yeah.
we do largely through a hypnotic modality.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you said, that you're robbing yourself ultimately of, being who you really are, being true to who you really are, and you're ultimately lying. But it's not even just to yourself. The person that you're needing to set this boundary with, the people, they're also not getting the real you. And, honestly, your subconscious mind knows the difference between what you're saying and what you're doing, and so you cannot help but to sort of have like a little passive aggressive resistance and resentment toward the person that you're building up a kind of a wall of
That's right.
resistance, right?
That's right. Yeah, of course. And again, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that we're not taught how to be with any of those things. So, and to our point earlier, if you're caught off guard, we go fight, flight, freeze, fawn immediately, right? We go, huh, deer in the headlights. Oh my God, I can't believe they just said that. So that's why, if you are able to start
What was the last word?
forecasting,
Fight, flight, freeze,
fawn.
fawn. What is fawn?
So fawn is sort of like a newer one on the scene, I guess. And it's the idea that if you were, let's say, in a primitive situation where you're about to be attacked by a bear, you are like, here, sweet little teddy bear, you're fawning all over it, basically.
Got it.
Or, an aggressor and a captor trying to say, oh, hey, what if I give you this? Or what if I, uh, placating, assuaging them. But
Okay.
the modern iteration of that fear response is people pleasing,
Mhm.
the
Okay.
way we have sort of modern iterations of all of them. And so that can be a very real gut instinct when you feel threatened, is to try to make somebody happy and please them.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does this, relate to like hypnotherapy and, like how can we use hypnotherapy as a way to help us to be stronger and set stronger boundaries and, and really speak our minds.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when when we are younger, we start to build in associations with things that we experience during our life as either a positive or a negative association. And it becomes embedded into the subconscious faculty of the mind, which, depending on who you talk to, is typically 88 to 95% of the mind's power, versus the conscious faculty, which is roughly 5 to 12%. So logically, you can know all damn day that they shouldn't treat you like that, or that's ridiculous, or I should be able to speak up for myself, or what's wrong with me. You can know that consciously because that's where logic and reason and rationale is housed. But if you developed a belief in the subconscious part of the mind, which where beliefs are housed, that it's safe to people please, and that's been your defense mechanism, it doesn't matter how many times you say it to yourself consciously, it hasn't become congruent with that subconscious belief. So in hypnosis, we're able to kind of bypass the barrier between the two, which is the critical factor of the mind. So the critical factor of the mind, or also known as the inner critic, so let's say you start telling yourself these positive mantras like, you deserve to speak up for yourself, you deserve to speak up for yourself, or you are capable of this, you are capable of this. That inner critic is going to kick back on that shit so hard, and it's going to be like, who do you think you are? You listen to one podcast, now you think you can be, because it's going, hey, that doesn't match up to the subconscious belief. We're not doing that. That's not what's really running this show. But hypnosis allows that critical factor of the mind that acts kind of like a little guard dog. It kind of puts the guard dog to sleep so that you can bypass that critical factor and drop suggestions into the subconscious and allow them to be more adopted more fully. So that's one of the things that I love so much about it. Now, you can hit it from the conscious side too. Like if you do it enough, if you tell that inner critic enough times with enough repetition, it will finally go, God, I guess she's serious. And they'll let it, I guess she means business, and it will drop into the subconscious faculty. But hypnosis is radically faster.
Yes,
As you know.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might have to say that 10 years before but yeah, with hypnosis you can do it much much faster because you're speaking directly to the subconscious mind.
That's
So, I
right.
understand you have like a 3-step process to boundary setting. Can you walk us through that exact process?
Sure. So that's actually what I was referring to earlier, but I can
Oh,
certainly give it like a little synopsis if you want.
sure. Yeah.
Um, because it will be different depending on what the boundary is. But the first step is to decide. That's just the being specific, being really clear about what the boundary actually is. And with the decision piece, you need to make sure that it would be crystal clear to both of you if the boundary got breached. So, for example, if I were to say to my mom, I just need you to respect me more, that's super ambiguous. It's not going to be helpful. But if I say, I'm not interested in talking about any religious based concepts, you have my word that if I change my mind, you'll be the first person to know. But I would really appreciate that you respect that. So it's being very specific. This is the topic that I will not engage. Then it's the delivery, actually conveying the message to the other person. And that will depend on if it's a hard and fast boundary or if it's something kind of fluid and the two of you are collaborating. And then the final piece is the enforcement, which is, whew, that one can be the tough one.
Yeah. Okay. So that was sort of the summary of what we talked about. So it's the decision, the delivery, and the enforcement ultimately, and the decision on what that boundary
Yes.
is, and the delivery, how we say it, and the enforcement. Actually, how we are going to go ahead and you have to come up with that, exactly what you have to decide all of that in advance. You can't just be doing that like on the spot. You've got to decide that in advance. And hypnosis can do you work with hypnosis to kind of help us to help people on on their delivery and their enforcement?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I do a specialized program that I take people through, take women through. That is about a 4-month process, and we
Mm.
tackle things both consciously and subconsciously. So we look at it. We start by untangling all the things that are not working, all the disempowering beliefs, any places for forgiveness, all of that, and then we sort of move into identity work of, what do I stand for? What are my values? What are my roles? Uh, what are my virtues? And then we move into all things communication, tough conversations, boundaries, speaking up, all of that. So the process throughout all of those modules, there's a a message that you'll listen to, like an audio lesson that you listen to, but then there's supporting hypnosis tracks depending on what we're covering. So and then people have access to me for 2 one-on-one sessions during that time, and that we
Mm.
can use for hypnosis as well. So sometimes we'll do, it depends to me on what their sensory preference is. So if they are highly visual, we might do something where we visualize an actual boundary and what are we throwing outside of it?
Ooh.
What are we allowing inside? If they aren't visual, and this is something that I hear all the time, I'm not sure if you get this, where there are people who are either a lot more auditory or auditory digital or kinesthetic, and going through guided imageries are so frustrating to them,
Mhm.
even though it's, we can all visualize, we know that, but telling somebody that who that's not their sensory preference is so frustrating. So with them, I'll do things that are way more about the sounds that you hear, or the essence of things, how things feel, or conjuring up things that they are able to remember already and use those in a hypnotic journey. So yeah, or we could do EFT is another great thing for boundaries. So all sorts of different hypnotic modalities that can be applicable to all of these different things.
Yeah, and it's important to really take a look at every aspect of your life where the complaints are happening, because I think that's what you initially talked about was, I mean, how I guess, that you're not setting boundaries is where you're complaining.
That's right.
And I know for me, it happens to be in personnel. Yeah, and
Yes.
so with that, I know that that's probably an area that I need to really take a look at. And I love that, the whole like taking ownership part of it that you mentioned, because listen, I mean, people are who they are, and they don't necessarily know your style or what you need unless you are the one that shares with them what your needs are, what you're
That's
needing
right.
from them. And so it is not a universal need, it is my need, and you have to take responsibility for that. And if that person chooses to respect that need, or they can deliver on that need, then they can. But if they can't deliver on your own need, or won't, and it's usually
Mhm.
the case that they won't, then it's not a
Right.
good match. It's not a good
That's right.
fit.
Well, I
And
think
yeah.
I think you're bringing up something that I think is really important to discern the different types of needs. So, for example, with your friendship that ended, depending on how each person delivers information. For example, I'm a 4 on the Enneagram. I am all things emotion, just nonstop emotional. So if I have a conversation with somebody where we're very much at odds, that will stay with me for days. So I have to be vigilant about, am I is this a safe interaction for me to have? Because I know that that's going to affect me. Now, somebody else, no matter what category we're talking about, whether we're talking about horoscopes, Myers-Briggs, whatever, we all have different ways that we're affected by things. So you could even use that in a conversation with somebody like that and to say, I recognize you're passionate about this and how important it is to you. What you might not see from me is how difficult this is for me to carry. I walk away from these conversations incredible, and just talk about the emotional frequency of how impactful that is for you, because for somebody else it might be energizing. And so
Mhm.
it's I can't understand why that's not energizing for you, or so, and that's a better way that you can advocate for your needs.
Yeah, because like you had also mentioned perception. It's my perception. I mean, somebody else might, be in that same conversation and loving it because they're in agreement with the conversation or whatever. Or they just get energized by having battling it out but for me, like those kinds of conversations are very it's just not even my forte.
Right. Right.
And so it's like, it's just very stressful and I just have to use way too much brain power. And I just, I mean, so it's my own perception. And I think people need to own up to the fact that whatever complaints you do have, those complaints are coming from your own way that you're perceiving the conversation happening. And at the same time, you can still choose and opt not to, want to have uh, those experiences or those events taking place. Whatever event, you can choose. You can make a choice for yourself that you don't want to experience that event.
That's right.
We'll all just get this one life, and
It's
we have to
true.
pick and choose which things we enjoy and what things we don't enjoy.
That's right. That's right. And I think for me personally, a lot of the stuff that's happening politically, I do feel very strongly about. And I took a social justice class last summer that was incredible, but one of the biggest takeaways that I had from that was to focus on the people who are genuinely willing to have a conversation. And if we want to be heard,
Hmm.
and we want to be understood, then we have to extend that to other people.
Yeah.
But if you are engaging with somebody who isn't willing to have that baseline of respect, it really isn't worth your time and energy, because they're already showing you, I'm not interested in you being heard, I'm only interested in me being heard. So I like to say, speak your truth into ears that can hear you, because
Yeah.
not all ears can. There's certain things about my belief system that I would love for my mom to be on board. I would love for us to have great conversations. But no matter how much I want that, I have to recognize that she will not be the ears that can hear me. It would
Yeah.
be me trying to persuade, me trying to, and that's not fair. I don't want the same in return.
Right.
I don't want the opposite. So if we switch and start looking at respect as a baseline, I think it completely changes the game.
Yeah. Well, and and that's one aspect of it, one facet of it, but the other facet of it is, like most people, are they're speaking kind of in an echo chamber. And so they're only speaking or complaining or whatever to people who are complaining about the same thing.
That's right.
And so they're when and so you have to be able to speak to people's listening. And so if you're speaking and you're trying to impact change, you have to speak it in such a way that that other person can like receive the listening, like,
Yes.
and that's like, I just, like I've been, tr- uh, trained in a lot of higher level, communications, and we both have,
Yes.
NLP, hypnosis. You understand that the only way you're ever going to, seek first to understand, then to be understood, get
Mhm.
into rapport with people. But when you're just like not even like able to like just come to um rapport, just basic get into rapport with the other person, you just all you're doing is talking at that person and
That's right.
not you're not doing anything except for just turning them off even more.
That's right. That's why I refuse to engage with people online and do like get into debates on. I'm like, that's like 10% of how we communicate is through typing, or what is it, 7% or something. And so we don't have inflection, we don't have body language. I'm like, we can't communicate with one another. So I feel very convicted and very strongly that it's because I have this skill set, that those are the conversations that I want to have in real life with people who are different than me, who are willing to have the conversation, right? And to be kind and compassionate about things. Because I think about this all the time. If you were driving along and you accidentally cut somebody off, and so now they're furious at you, and so they start honking and they're like, fuck you, and then flipping you off. Your instinct when somebody's coming at you like that is not to go, oh wow, I can't wait to implement what you're sharing with me. I
Right,
like,
right.
I can't wait to be better for you. We immediately go into fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and we go, either we're gonna be combative, we're gonna like run away, we are stunned or whatever it is. So we go into a non-collaborative, non-productive conversation. And that's what happens when we speak to one another with acrimony and vitriol. And I mean, think about it in any marital relationship. Your partner goes off on you. Are you like, honey, I can't wait to work on that? No,
Right.
that's not how it works. And at the same time, I want to recognize that it's counterintuitive, because when we are passionate about something or we see something that is an injustice, our instinct is to fight for that and to be vocal and sometimes combative. But what I want people to hear is that that very rarely sets you up for success. That very rarely ever enables somebody, if ever, somebody else to hear you, understand you, and then be interested in making change. So I have a girlfriend out here who we are on the totally different sides of the spectrum, politically, but we have really genuinely amazing conversations with one another because we both love and respect each other so much, and and seek to be understood and to understand. And that's a different type of relationship.
I love it. I love it. This has been a really great, deep, rich, enlightening discussion. I really, really have enjoyed having you as a guest here. And I understand that you are also offering a free workbook, free workshop, all your podcast episodes, which I can't wait to be on your podcast.
Yes.
All of those can be accessed over at thejoyjunkie.com/free. And so do you want to say any more about that, or
Uh, I would just say, the podcast is probably where you get a real strong sense of my teaching style. But again, I have a free hypnosis track over there, lots of freebies. And then as far as social media, I hang out most commonly on Instagram. My handle pretty much everywhere is the Joy Junkie. And junkie is Junkie, by the way. But yeah, so come say hi on Insta or grab some freebies. I would just love for you to kind of get to know me and the work that I do.
yeah, definitely do it. I highly recommend it. And it's just been a wonderful conversation. I look forward to keeping the conversation with you going. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Power of Your Mind podcast. I really enjoyed having you.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much.